Well, folks, Pete Buttigieg is clearing his path for a 2028 presidential run. Buttigieg, who was reportedly mulling a campaign either for the open Senate seat in Michigan or the open governor's mansion in Michigan, has announced today he will not be running for either of those races in 2026, really opening up a path for him in 2028 to run for the Democrat nomination for president. But before we jump into this, drop down below, hit that subscribe button, make sure you never miss another video again in the future. So Buttigieg put out a statement on X, and there's more on Substack, but basically said, I care deeply about who Michigan will elect as governor and send to the United States Senate next year, but I have decided against competing in either race. I remain enthusiastic about helping candidates who share our values and who understand that in this moment, leadership means not only opposing today's cruel chaos, but also presenting a vision of a better alternative. Well, okay, Buttigieg, yeah, you did present a alternative. Her name was Kamala Harris, and she got smoked in all 7 swing states. You had an alternative, Joe Biden, who you in the mainstream media complex had told us that he was alive when we knew the whole time he wasn't alive. So I really don't know what you're talking about, a better alternative or better vision here. You guys had a competing vision, and you lost. It's really as simple as that. But we know Buttigieg was the former mayor of South Bend, Indiana. I'm going to jump over here real quick. He was a former mayor of South Bend, Indiana for 8 years. He then did not seek to run for a third term in 2020, ended up running for the presidency, the Democrat nomination in 2020, made a pretty good showing for himself where he won the Iowa caucus narrowly and then barely lost the New Hampshire primary. Just very, very good. And really it elevated him on the national level. He ended up dropping out and endorsing Biden in this race. And because of his national attention he got and endorsing Biden, he earned himself a spot in the Biden administration as the 19th United States Secretary of Transportation. And we all know that under Buttigieg's leadership, leading the Department of Transportation, our airways got less safer. We focused on DEI quotas over merit-based hiring practices. You know, there's a lot of things that Pete Buttigieg did wrong when he was the transportation secretary. You know, you look at air traffic controllers. You know, there's a shortage of air traffic controllers because they were so focused on meeting diversity quotas instead of, you know, I don't care if it's a white straight male or a black lesbian. It doesn't matter to me. Are you good at your job? Are you going to make sure that planes don't crash into each other? That's all I care about. I don't care if you're transgender. I don't care if you're XYZ. Don't care. Just don't care. But Buttigieg, like we said he was considering a run, and really he was considered the strongest candidate in the race for the United States Senate. I know he had talked about running for governor, but it was really the Senate seat was really what most pundits were focused on. But he said he considered not running, or decided he's not going to run because he believes the Democrats have a strong and deep bench in Michigan, which I think is debatable. But going into the Senate race in Michigan, Buttigieg was seen by many as the strongest candidate that could jump in this race and win. Because as we know, outgoing Senator Gary Peters is not running for re-election. It's a very competitive seat. President Trump won it in 24. Biden won it in 2020. Trump won it in 2016. Alyssa Slotkin won it in 24. Gretchen Whitmer won it in 22. Obviously, this is going to be a very, very competitive race here. And the Democrats needed the strongest candidate as possible. And I did believe, even though I very much disagree with the policies of Buttigieg, I felt from a Democrat perspective, he was the best chance that they had there. Obviously, it doesn't mean they can't win the race. It just means that the strongest candidate, from my perspective, is no longer in this race. Looking in here at the Senate seat, who else could jump in this race? So the current state senator from the 8th district, Mallory McMorrow, has already announced that she's going to be jumping in the race. And also U.S. Representative from Michigan's 11th Congressional District, Haley Stevens, will also be jumping in, most likely. You know, it says decision expected in 25, but now with Buttigieg out of the way, I really think that's going to open up more Democrats to jump in this race. Some other names that have been thrown out there is a current Michigan Attorney General, Dana Nelson. We also have Sarah Anthony, who's a state senator, newly elected about 2 years ago, it looks like. And another name that really caught me off guard, Rashida Tlaib. Wow, the pro-Hamas terrorist sympathizer. Yeah, that's going to go real well in a swing state. But she is the U.S. representative from Michigan's 12th congressional district, elected back in 2018 in the 2018 midterms. She's part of what used to be the squad, AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Presley. I forget what her first name, Anaya Presley, I think was her name. She was known for the just annoying squad of minority women who just never shut the hell up. Like that, let's be honest. But obviously, there are some other names that are going to jump in this race here. Hypothetical polling in this race has shown that Gretchen Whitmer, even though she said she's not going to be jumping in this race, Gretchen Whitmer at 43, Pete Buttigieg at 27. So your top two candidates that primary voters will look at are no longer in the race. That's a tough one. Haley Stevens, I would say, is, federally probably more well-known in the state of Michigan. She now is looking like the most likely person to win. But obviously, this is going to be a dogfight. We really don't know who is going to win at the end of this. Now, looking at the governor's race, let's see. So as we know, current governor Gretchen Whitmer cannot run for re-election. She is term limited in 2026. And there's been a couple people who have already jumped in this race. Jocelyn Benson, who's the Michigan Secretary of State since 2019. The current lieutenant governor has jumped in the race. And then a county sheriff has also jumped in the race on the Democrat side. Mallory McMarrow has also considered mulling a campaign for governor. We're going to most likely expect to hear if she's going to jump in the governor's race or the Senate race in April 2025. Obviously, this race is going to heat up with primaries most likely to be held in, early summer next year. But obviously, the people have declined. Gary Peters not running in, and Pete Buttigieg just said that he is not running as of right now. Hypothetical polling shows Jocelyn Benson with a pretty commanding lead in this race here. Obviously, there's a big chunk, 20% of the electorate that is undecided in this race. But obviously, Jocelyn Benson, who's the current Michigan Secretary of State, is polling very, very well inside of this race. Obviously, has some pretty big endorsements in here. Really, the End Citizens United and Emily's List, two very popular lobbying groups that are really help elect Democrats. That's going to be a big one. Chris Swanson, who is a county sheriff, has got a couple big ones. They've got some local Teamsters, the Iron Workers, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 948. And then, of course, Gretchen Whitmer has declined to endorse in this race. Most likely going to wait until the primary's over. Not going to hurt any feelings in this race here. On the Republican side, not a lot. Let's just say that. Not a lot that I'm seeing right here. Mike Cox could be a good choice. John James could be a good choice in here, but also he's considered running for Senate in 2026. Tudor Dixon, not as much. Perry Johnson, no, not really. We saw you in 22. We saw you in 22 and in 24. Obviously, Mike Rogers could potentially jump in this race, but I think most people, if Mike Rogers is going to jump in a race, I think most people expect that he's going to jump in the race for Senate. So we're going to see how this all plays out here. But a big thing that we're not looking at in the Senate race here is third parties. There has been a third party, let's see, that has announced they're going to run. He's the where he is, I believe he's currently the mayor of Detroit right now. And I'm just going to try and find him on here. Here we go. Mike Duggan, who was the 75th mayor of Detroit since 2014, now an independent. And let's just find he is looking to run in 2024, in 2026. Gosh, where Well, I can't find any information. Let's see. Well, maybe not. Maybe I'm confusing this with someone else in here. But ultimately, we know that Michigan has been cemented as a swing state in federal and, I should say, statewide elections. We know that the state is up for grabs. Michigan voted for President Trump twice. They voted for Joe Biden once. In 24, in the same election when they voted for President Trump, Michigan's also elected Alyssa Slotkin to be the senator by a pretty slim margin, but they still elected her. And like we said, statewide, Michigan is a swing state, and Republicans are looking to capitalize on that. But a lot is going to depend on how President Trump is able to perform and how the economy is doing in 2026. Because here's the thing. If President Trump keeps putting some of this ridiculous pressure on Canada without a defined outcome that has been made clear to all parties involved, it could hurt the GOP in the midterms, even with a map that's favorable for the GOP. We know President Trump has been threatening and using tariffs to really get what he wants. That's the reality of this. But the thing is, I'm okay. If President Trump is trying to get a specific concession from another country and he's using tariffs as a leverage, as an economic tool to induce that, I'm all about that. But when we're just using tariffs as economic policy, no, that goes almost against all common knowledge of modern economics in the last 2 centuries. The reality is tariffs, if used as an economic tool, will be a tax on the American people, and they will see it that way. Prices will go up because of tariffs. Our goal should be to have free trade. The goal of tariffs should be to either get a concession from another country or to get other countries to lower their tariffs at the same time that we lower our tariffs. It's as simple as that. We should not be using tariffs on Canada just willy-nilly. And obviously, the markets are reacting not very well to what President Trump's doing. If the market thought that President Trump was just using tariffs as leverage, the markets would not react the way they are. But the markets are reacting. The Dow's down a ton since President Trump was elected. Now, in the grand scheme of things, it's only a couple points. But ultimately, people follow that. People pay attention to that. That's a lot of people's metric, whether it's factually based or not. That's a lot of people's metrics for success is the stock market. And if we're just going to be levying tariffs against Canada with no defined outcome, just saying, well, you need to do better with immigration and drug smuggling. Well, less than 10% of all border encounters come from Canada. Less than 0.002% of all fentanyl seized at our borders comes from Canada. So there's a pretty big imbalance there. And just to say they need to do more, yes. Is 1 ounce of fentanyl crossing the border a terrible thing? Absolutely. Should we do everything we can to make sure it stops? Absolutely. But you have to look at the bigger picture here. 43 ounces of fentanyl came from Canada in 2024. 21,000 pounds came from Mexico. We just have to look at this realistically and be pragmatic about it. Trump cannot, it's like if the economy is in a world of hurt, it's going to hurt for President Trump in the midterms. It's not going to be fun for President Trump in the midterms if something happens to the economy. Trump needs to be reined in. He's talking about using tariffs against Canada to make them become the 51st state. It was funny at first, but let's get serious about this, guys. Canada is not going to become the 51st state. And all you have done is give power and give really, you've given a lot of power to the Liberal Party in Canada. We want Pierre Poilievre to be the next prime minister from Canada. But ever since Trump has taken this trade war against Canada, all of a sudden, the Liberal Party, their poll numbers have shot up like 20%. It's like, who is that helping? You're probably going to get a better deal with Pierre Poilievre as the prime minister than you are a prime minister from the Liberal Party. Trump just needs to, use tariffs to leverage other countries to do what we want, but just as pure economic policy is a terrible idea. I 100% do not support it. But let's take a look. What does this mean for the Democrats in the 2026 midterm? So as we know, this is the current makeup of the Democrat or of the current Senate seats. Oops, that is not correct. This is the current makeup of the Senate seats right now. Let's just going to go through and fill these in real quick. As we know, the toss-up states are going to be Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Minnesota, New Hampshire, Maine. That's what we're looking at right now. This is the current makeup of the race. 47-53 for the Republicans. These are considered the toss-up states going into this election here. Minnesota, obviously, Tina Smith not seeking re-election. That's going to be an open primary battle. Lieutenant Governor in Minnesota is looking to jump in this race. There's also a former state senator from Edina who just jumped in the race in Minnesota. That's going to be a true battle. Michigan, obviously, we've just talked about that today. Gary Peters, Pete Buttigieg, you got Mike Rogers on the Republican side of the aisle. And then also looking at North Carolina, you have Tom Tillis, very unpopular. There have been some polls taken showing Laura Trump in a primary just whooping Tom Tillis' ass. Whooping him. Georgia, you have John Ossoff, the most vulnerable Democrat, running for re-election in 2026. You have Brian Kemp, a very, very popular governor from Georgia, going to most likely, hopefully, going to jump in this race here. You look at New Hampshire, Jaheen Shaheen just now announced yesterday she is not running for re-election there. Chris Sununu reconsidering if he's going to run for election. Just think, in 2020, Shaheen was reelected by like 16 points in the same election when Chris Sununu, a Republican, was reelected by like 23 points in a statewide election in the same race. Chris Sununu could jump in this race, and, obviously there are some Republicans who do not like Chris Sununu, and obviously Chris Sununu, I don't agree with him on everything. But if I had to choose between a Republican who's going to vote with the party 80% of the time or a Democrat who's going to vote with the party 0% of the time, I'm going to choose the Republican every day. Same thing with Minnesota. The Republicans, if they decide to nominate Royce White, you can just write this entire election off. Zero chance that the Republicans will win with Royce White. If the Republicans are serious about winning in Minnesota in 2026, they will not nominate Royce White. It's just as simple as that. If they not, Royce White is going to vote with Donald Trump 99% of the time. Let's find a good, strong America First candidate who's going to vote with the party 85% of the time, but who can also win a statewide election. Because I want a Republican who's going to vote with the party as much as possible versus a Democrat who's not going to vote with the party at all. Then you have Maine, Susan Collins, very popular incumbent Republican from a lean blue state. Obviously, she's won re-election 4 or 5 times since 1997 when she first became a senator. You look at 2020 in the same race that Biden won by 9 points. The senator from Maine, Susan Collins, won by about 9 points at the same time. Democrats see as Maine and North Carolina as their top targets to flip the seats, and Republicans see Georgia, Michigan, New Hampshire, Minnesota as their top targets to expand their majority that they have in the Senate right now. Obviously, if we were to today, where are we at? I'm going to say Minnesota is lean. Michigan is a true toss-up. Georgia is Republican lean, especially if Brian Kemp jumps in this race. North Carolina, I'm going to say that this is a toss-up state. New Hampshire, I'm going to say this is a slight Democrat. And then Maine, same thing, slight Democrat, maybe even lean Democrat here. But ultimately, it's going to come down to Michigan, North Carolina. If I had to put money on it, I'm going to say Michigan goes to the Democrats, North Carolina goes to the Republicans. The Republicans flip 1 seat, expand their electoral majority to 54. Another place that you could look at, though, look at Virginia. Mark Warner running for re-election when he was initially elected back in 2014. It was a close race. Governor Glenn Youngkin cannot run for re-election there. So for governor, and has looked at jumping in the race for Senate. He's a very popular governor, has plus 50% approval rating in a lean blue state. That could be something if Glenn Youngkin jumps in this race, where this could be a true toss-up too, which the Republicans could look at picking up. But ultimately, this is where I have it as of right now. So that's going to wrap things up for today, folks. Drop down below. Let me know what your thoughts are. Who do you think is the strongest Democrat in the Michigan race to win the Senate seat? And vice versa. Who do you think is the strongest Republican to win in this seat? We'll catch you next time, folks.